welcome to the A. Marie Speaks podcast, where I'm talking about all things introspection, spirituality, and happiness. Today's episode is part 2 in a series where I am attempting to give some quick explanations on basic terminology that people are using in this sort of new aged ascension world where people are talking about more spiritual evolution topics. We have a lot of new jargon taking place, and I think it's especially important for people who are new and who haven't had time to expose themselves to multiple people's versions of these definitions to kind of work out their own. I wanted to give a place right at the start where people could hop on and hear a brief or broad explanation of these terms. So if you're just tuning in, I would suggest taking a listen to part 1, where I started off talking about sovereignty, consent, and polarization. So if those words are totally out there to you and you're very confused by them, I would suggest going over and listening to that, or you can take a quick read of the article that sparked these podcasts, which will be linked below. One thing I will say is it is lengthy and wordy. I wanted to use it as a template and read through it like an audio version, similar to what I do with some of my other blogs. But I wanted to give like a 101 to beginners. And as I was rereading this that I had written a couple weeks ago, I came back to it and I realized it was definitely not a 101 type of writing. And so I have switched it up, and I'm attempting to do a brief series here, a couple of episodes to just go over these terminologies and talk about what they mean. So if terms like sovereignty, consent, polarization, that polarization is another word for like a service alignment. Are you a service to others type of person, or are you a service to self type of other person? If those kinds of concepts are brand new to you, I would really suggest taking a listen to that podcast before you step into this realm, because I'm going to kind of build off of the understanding that I've already covered on part 1. And so if you haven't heard it, you could be a little put off or confused with the jump off point here in part 2. Because in part 2, I wanted to bring in and talk now about infringements and boundaries, and a little bit about working through distortions. And these kinds of terms and words really reflect your polarity or your polarization, what orientation you've decided to choose. And I'm going to try to give my best version of both sides of the coin, and give sort of a broad overview of what infringements can mean to both, and what we're seeing in the types of distortions of truth on both sides of the spectrum. I talked a little bit about that in part 1, but I am going to dive a little bit deeper here in part 2 as we explore what those differences really bring down into choice points when we're approaching catalysts or problems like infringements, right? Because infringements in itself is just a word which you can kind of get even if you just know the basic regular definition. It's a energetic one more that I'm speaking about here than you would think about like, I don't know, legal terminus, I think, is where we usually hear things of infringing upon rights or copyrights infringements and things like that. But in this spectrum, I'm talking more about emotional, energetic, psychological infringements. It's difficult to not keep it vague when you're talking about them because, as you can probably tell, there's a huge variety of possibilities. And like we discussed in part one, this is a free will universe, and there's a spectrum of light to dark and negative to positive, and in the mix are all possibilities, right? And so there's many types of infringements. The first thing that I feel, and again, this is coming from my perspective, which I feel is more of a positively polarized service to others viewpoint, but in my understanding and my belief is that it's very important that we remember each person's reality is real to them. Your reality that you are experiencing is your ultimate real reality. Your perspective, your views, all these little filters that you personally put onto your reality for all of these reasons are specific and individual to you. Even somebody who you live with and a direct family member who you spend every day with, they still have their own individual unique filter placed on their life, which they're experiencing and pulling information through. So it's important that we remember that when we're interacting in our daily life, in these relationships. Every person mirrors their own perspective, assumptions, and conditions out and creates their reality. Now, infringement happens when you choose to take your overlay or your filter of reality, right? And you go and place it onto somebody else. And you want them to see it your way, right? This is infringing. This is the base level of what infringement means. Now, it can be direct and literal, like telling somebody what they should or should not do. It can also be subtle infractions, like staring at somebody, the back of their head, until they turn around and look at you. Both those things, if you can see the intention that's held within the person, they both come from a place of control and manipulation of the other self, right? You're telling, literally speaking, and overlaying your opinion onto someone else. In direct contrast of sovereignty, in direct contrast of the natural law and agreement that you want respected and withheld for yourself. You're not upholding it with another when you do that. We explain away these things for a myriad of reasons, and just like I talked about at the part one, there's a whole societal, cultural expectations, there's indoctrination, mind control, all of these things, whatever you want to call them, that really push us to believe that we are supposed to be infringing upon others, that we are supposed to be guiding or forcing because we know better. We get it even from our parents, and even myself as a parent. I struggle very much with this over, my kids are 15 and 8, so I've been struggling with this for 15 years. But as you come into yourself and you're able to trust more in your own sovereignty, your own connection to God, source, or whatever you choose to call that, you get into that mode of faith, and infringements become much easier to let go of and much easier to recognize when you're doing them, because you're actively working to stay in a mode of service to others, and you're actively working to try to identify how others are feeling and how you're feeling as well. And so infringements become something that they pop up. Just like I spoke about in part one with the catalysts and shadow work. These bumps in the road, the little skips in the track. If you just brush it off and keep it moving, you're not ready for whatever that catalyst is trying to disrupt in your normal routine. But catalysts come up for a reason, and if you're ready, then you'll stop right there and you'll go and check it out, and you'll go and see, hold up, what's the problem here? And that's what will begin to happen if you work with it, if you work to release infringing upon others. It becomes easier and it becomes more free. There's also ways that you can unintentionally infringe on other people. And as you get to explore these ideas in your working life, you'll see things like this. But there's these subtle ways of doing things, like promoting your preference of a particular thing over someone else's choice, or offering up an uninvited opinion of their life. Those things operate on a restrictive frequency. They seek to bind, clog, and stagnate that other being for your benefit, right? That's infringement. Anytime anything that is restrictive, binding, seeks to hold and control should be an immediate red flag. In a free will universe where you've chosen to align positively, that is. Because like I've said, there's a spectrum, and there is a converse to this, which is the negative polarity, and they view infringement much differently, if you could imagine. It's kind of logical. So the key to stepping into, this working place that I was speaking about in part one, this place of sovereignty, is understanding the responsibility that comes along with it, which is keeping yourself in line about infringing upon others. Because the positive path, it seeks to integrate, accept, acknowledge, move forward. So it's very difficult to do that when your focus of attention is outside on others, trying to hold and control their realities. You have no time or space to step into your own, control your own, because your attention is out there in the exterior, right? I talked about that a lot in part one. So there's another side to infringements, which is obviously they can be very direct and abusive. And this is where we'll talk a bit about boundaries as well, because when you start to learn these about service to others, and this, okay, I don't want to infringe upon others, it becomes immediately, you kind of swing to that extreme. Well, what about somebody attacks me? What about somebody screams in my face? I'm not supposed to do anything? And those kinds of things are things we work through individually. There's a lot of personal work, shadow work, love and understanding, time that needs to be spent individually for each of us to come to our own truth about what to do with infringing, direct and abusive type of catalysts. And I'll never try to tell somebody what is right to do for them in a situation. Here I'm just going to speak in broad terms. And like I said numerous times, if things don't resonate with you, don't feel like you have to agree, or that I'm trying to talk you into believing my version of this. This is just what I've come up to now, and in my own personal work, working through a lot of my own catalysts, coming to these conclusions over time about positive polarity and about this balancing work that takes place in between every being of dark and light, and the alchemy that we're doing, this energetic alchemy work. So just to briefly touch on these direct and abusive types of infringements, when in the new age world, you'll start to come into whole levels of what people believe to be varieties of possibilities. Things like entities and alien beings, demonic beings. It can go into like forms of attachments, things like cords and anchors, entanglements. If you have been introduced into that world already, then you probably understand what I'm talking about. But if this all is new to you, I would just suggest take those exterior infringements, if they don't directly apply to your world right now, and just put them off to the side for now and work on internal work, because there's so many varieties, and who knows what the truth is about these kinds of things. But with that said, I will also say that if you feel like you have some kind of unwanted infringement inside you, bothering you, following you, don't brush it off. I highly suggest digging deeper into that, taking your light and shining it into the dark corners in there whenever that thing pops up, and saying, excuse me, what are you? Why are you making me feel like this? Without fear, and in a place that comes from honest curiosity and a willingness to accept and move forward. Because when we're talking about these things like fear, and we have these negative entity attachments, you can't work through them or solve them until you're able to come at them without the fear. And so if you feel unable to see it from any other angle that isn't causing anxiety or fear, I would definitely say reach out to somebody for support, and maybe through hypnosis or guided meditations or essential oils, Reiki, raindrop. There's a lot of energetic support services out there to help deal with these kinds of hard blockages in a positive way, to help you, again, alchemize and move through these things. Because life in itself is meant to be exciting. It's meant to be diverse and challenging, right? It's meant to be taken part in. It's not something that you can just sit on the sidelines and watch happen. I mean, you certainly can, but there will be no progress in your part of the infinite mosaic that is this life. And your piece is just as important as every other. And the universe, in fact, as a whole, cannot progress without your small part also evolving. And so, in all actuality, the longer someone sits on the sidelines, diverting their soul's responsibility, the longer the game they're watching will go on. It's a reflective cycle, this universe. And if you're choosing not to take part in your game, it's okay. It is a choice. Like I've said, it's a free will universe. But this is why we have catalysts, infringements. This is where uncomfortability comes in. This is why this is the 3D, 4D structure. It is necessary to have these infringements because they shake a soul out of the audience and motivate them to take part in the real game that's actually happening, right? It's very difficult to take a back seat when you have literal, direct, or abusive infringements, like encroaching on your life. But again, it's all about the way you choose to respond to the infringements, right? That is what sets the tone of your vibration, as well as the stage for all your future interactions. Strong working knowledge of your own sovereignty and what that means to you is really a prerequisite for conscious responses, informed consent, right, that we talked about in part one, for any incoming information of any type, really, but especially when it comes to these heavy negative energies like control, deception, manipulation. It's very important to choose your directionality so that you have guidance to go by, because in what these polarity paths really provide is sort of a structure, response mechanisms to deal with catalysts, to view infringements, to work through interactions with the other beings that take part in this reality. And so when we're talking about infringements, and now I'm going to move just a bit into boundaries and also ways to approach infringements when they happen, you really first have to have a solid ground onto where your personal polarization lies. And like I've said before, it's really not evil and good. It is negative and positive, and it does have charges to it. So the more that you can accept and understand and start to see the energetic workings of how the ether, the universe operates, then you can live more freely and more comfortably in it. I won't get too sidetracked, but if you don't really understand what the ether is or the universe, or you're really constricted by kind of the scientific theories of what this universe is, then I would highly suggest spending some time looking at other viewpoints over on the metaphysics page on my site. I have a lot of other information where you can see different theories about how the universe could be made up differently, and maybe not atoms and matter and molecules the way that science explains it at this very moment. When you start to look at their real scientific quote-unquote facts, you realize they're actually theories, and scientific theories are not proven. That's the baseline of what a theory is. And all these things are fake structures that intellectuals have built, claiming they're real and solid, and they make assumptions and conclusions, but really it's a rickety cart of houses that they've built in the scientific world, and they try to make us believe that it's a solid brick house. So yeah, those are infringements, and this is distortions. This is what the matrix, this life, is all about, manipulating information and energy and learning how to do so responsibly and in energetic alignment with other beings. And if you're brand new to this, maybe you've never heard of Dolores Cannon, but she is a widely known, very famous woman who's passed since now, but check her out. And she has a wonderful theory with lots of evidence, quote unquote, to back it up about Earth being a school of sorts, and that we're here to learn in a school level, in this density and dimensions, how to manipulate energy and manifest and create in harmony together before we could be graduating and leaving Earth, or leaving third to fourth density and getting into these higher densities where manifestation is instantaneous, where things are much different and not as bogged down and solid as it is right now. But in order to learn, it's sort of like there's training wheels, right? You don't just put a 3-year-old on a bike. There's training wheels on that bike. You don't especially put it on a motorcycle and just let him go, right? There's levels to this. And infringements, distortions, and catalysts are bumps in the road. Like, you can't ever learn to be a good biker on a flat, beautiful sidewalk. You know, you have to learn to navigate bumps and roots in the ground growing, and stop when there's a car approaching. You know, there's lots of things. So this is just helpful metaphors to help you better understand what the terms like infringements and catalysts and distortions all are, and how they work to really mold and morph us very gradually, on many, many different levels. So when I'm going to speak about boundaries next, I want to lay the setting and just underline how important it really is to know where you're working towards, what your homeostasis or your polarity is that you're seeking to maintain. Because that's really what it is seeking to maintain. So don't feel discouraged if you feel like, oh, I resonate a lot with the negative. I have a lot of negative attributes, you know, going on. I'm struggling a lot with control issues. I must be bad. But it's like, no, that's not even what it's about at all. It's just about acknowledging, okay, I have a heavier charge going on here. How about as soon as I realize that I'm anchoring myself in a direction, I start to try to bring in some positivity, try to bring in some love and understanding aspects, and sway the pendulum in the other direction, because that's really what this is. It's a balancing. But it's like driving a vehicle that pulls to a certain direction, right? When you choose a polarity, you have this sort of guidelines that are going to pull you in this certain direction. You see infringements a certain way, you see distortions and align with different truths or inverted truths, or whatever the case may be. So knowing which one you want to be pulling towards is key, because if you don't, as you can tell, like, how could you really get going if you don't know which side you're trying to pull towards, right? So again, if you didn't check out part 1 and you're unsure about that, you can go back and listen after, or read the article to see a bit more in depth about some characteristics on polarization sides. But I did just want to underline this fact that the refusal to choose a side really helps you or hurts you. It helps you remain neutral and stagnant, and it really doesn't allow you to pick up any sort of momentum in your spiritual growth, because you have to remember, right, we're on an eternal journey, and if you're trying to maintain growth in a certain directionality, you have to make choices based on that directionality. So with that said, I want to look briefly at how the different polarizations sort of look at infringement and look at intention, so that you can get a better idea and maybe see where you're standing. Gauge yourself a little. So positive polarity is what we call high vibration, this guidance of acceptance and unconditional love. Once you work in it and seek it, it becomes like a beacon inside of you, or an internal flame that like shines out and exposes all intentions for what they are. This positive polarity, when it taps into that beacon, it is tapping into source truth. Now, truth is a high vibration. It reveals all lower frequencies exactly where they resonate at, because truth seeks clarity, and truth knows there's purpose to everything. And so when people of positive polarity are looking out at the world, their filter is mirroring that. They are able to see things clearly for what they are. And the lower vibrations don't appreciate that very much, because lower vibrations flourish in the dark, in secrecy, because the lower vibrations have this underlying truth to their negative orientation, which says that all beings are attempting to pull energy from others, right? We talked a lot about this in part one, but there's those energetic wells, your unconditional energetic love well inside of you, and the service to others, the negative polarity, they seek to fill their well from others' energy instead of realizing that there is a well of their own they could tap into, which is unconditional and ever flowing from source. But as you can tell, like, this perspective, these set very different stages for very different types of life experiences. The negative path, their guidance, their truth tells them to rely on deception and trickery through covert means and manipulations to maintain that energetic flow coming in from others, right? Because their truth tells them others are doing that same thing. Others are trying to steal their energy, siphon off of them. And so, of course, they are going to try everything to shield, to hide what they have from others, to keep a part of it secret, because they feel everything will be stolen in the end. Positive polarity, again, just quickly, if you did not listen to part one yet, positive polarity is able to tap in to that natural, organic, unconditional love spark that is inside of your God source spark that each of us has inside of us, right? As a sovereign being, as a soul, this is what we're speaking on. That soul essence, that little unique piece that makes you a creator being, that is a well which you can work with to dive into, and it is ever flowing and eternal. It is like a portal to the universe, to source, to the ether, and the universal womb of creation. I won't get too deep into those ideas right now. This is base level. But just to understand that positive polarity, the positive path, understands there's a well in there that's theirs, direct connection to source. And because they work with, acknowledge, and tap into that, it flows up and out of their well in an outward directionality, which is ever flowing. And as you work at it, it keeps to be ever flowing, right? But it is always tappable. It is always there for you. It could never, ever disappear. Positive polarity acknowledges that truth and follows that truth, versus negative polarity, which either they choose to ignore that for whatever reason, or maybe they've forgotten it, they've been tricked out of it. There's definitely a variety of reasons that can happen. But as you can tell, there's a natural opposition. This is why it seems so, on the surface level, so basic, like good versus evil. But when you start to pick it apart and examine it, you realize that it's a whole spectrum to work within, and we encompass all of it. So having your footing and your foundation of who you are, moral setting of your sovereign being, is essential, and also choosing your polarity and your directionality is essential before you can start to set boundaries to what you might consider to be infringements. Boundaries are very important, especially, they're more important for a negative polarity, but I'm not going to speak too much on that. But they are very important as well for a positive polarity, setting strong energetic boundaries for yourself and remaining vigilant in each present moment helps you to maintain your polarization throughout the day, even when you're presented with infringements. Your vibration tells you whether an infringement is acceptable or not. It's not something that anyone else can decide for you. As a rule of thumb, positive polarity, benevolent beings, and again, this is not just my opinion, this has come from conclusions from many channeled things, listening to documentaries and podcasts and reading texts and over time in cultures, okay? This is not my personal knowledge, but it is my own wording. As a rule of thumb, benevolent beings see any impression of information transmitted to another without first asking and having willingly expressed informed or conscious consent. Anything other than that is an infringement on that other. Okay? Now, that is serious. It encompasses a lot when you start to apply the layers of what infringement can mean, right? Because if you remember what we said earlier, like, it's not just direct and abusive infringements. These can be really subtle, sort of subconscious programming type of infringement. So it takes a lot of weeding out. It takes a lot of work to identify and to start pulling out and releasing the infringements that you hold within yourself. If you choose to, again, if you choose to be seeking that positive polarity, then you'll seek to integrate and accept infringements. But negatively oriented beings, they don't understand that concept whatsoever. Does not interest them. It's just beyond that direct capacity or motivation or caring to even want to examine or expose it. They're more concerned with keeping that steady incoming flow of energy because their toroidal center is pulling outwards to integrate into their inner well from others. And so that's their whole first step, just keeps their main prerogative their whole life. You can never take a second step outside of service to self because in itself, it tells you right there, service to self. You get very caught up in the first step. You can never get outside the first step because you're always putting yourself first. If you find yourself very confused by the distinctions that I'm making, that's totally okay. If you don't really understand this conscious consent idea, or you feel skeptical about it, or you feel skeptical about what infringements might be, it's not a big deal. Don't feel like you have to get things. Chances are, if you do some active discovery within yourself into the concept of sovereignty and some introspection practices like meditation, you can come to unlock the exciting potentials that come to interacting with this higher, deeply connected level. But again, it's all about preference and choice. This is a free will universe. Feel free to forget all about this and not follow through with any practices, that's up to you. So now that we know about how important it is to know where we're going, I want to just speak briefly about boundaries. There's basically 3 types of boundaries when you look at it, in my opinion. I choose to look at it this way. We have emotional boundaries, which are basically morals. We have physical boundaries, which are pretty obvious. Your physical body, how you choose to interact with the world, what you find acceptable in touching or personal space. And then we have spiritual boundaries, and that has to do with service orientation and the methods and transfers of information that you choose to partake in. So it's very important that you stay vigilant in your present moment and that you recognize these 3 types of boundaries and bodies: emotional, physical, spiritual. Because staying true to your heart in the face of disruptions takes courage and faith. And our whole being is a working of this practice. Our energetic boundaries are basically our parameters in this world. And it's important to remember that the world is much more than just what the visual eye sees in the solid 3D world, right? We're also energetic beings. We have energetic bodies. We have emotions and thoughts, right? There's plenty of things our physical eye even can't see, like infrared light and all these spectrums. So it's important to remember that your intention to have a secure, protected boundary around you is vital. And it really does work. It might seem like when you start to first learn about this, like it's a crazy thought. Oh, it's just your imagination. Yes, 100 times yes. It is just your imagination. That's the entire point. Imagination is the ether. Imagination is infinite intelligence. It is all possibilities. It is your tapping into the well in your connection to Creator Source. There are huge inversions and distortions around the value of imagination and creation and how we are creator beings. If that's new to you, it's exciting, I hope. It can be a little scary, but just know that, yes, you are a creator being, and you can, no matter how old you are, or how long it's been since you've had a dream, or used your imagination, or been creative, or doodled, or draw, or whatever, paint, there's so many different things for every different person, but you can always just jump right back. It's always there for you, the very moment that you choose to use it. It's super powerful to remember who you are. And that also comes with the whole idea of sovereignty. That's what you use to charge these energetic boundaries that you visualize around yourself. You use these emotions like courage and faith and love, and they charge a protection around you. And you use your determination and commitment to those boundaries to maintain them. And you will see huge changes in your world if you choose to actively think about them and visualize them. Now, boundaries also are not just like an energetic visualization. It's also the way that we present ourselves, the energy, the vibe we give off to others. It's essentially how we hold ourselves that teaches others how to treat us. When we respond to interactions, we are essentially teaching others who we are and how we act, right? Especially when our boundaries are pushed. This is why boundaries are blessings and so crucial. They help define who you are. They create your world and reality. Every decision that you're making is building your reality. You'll see dramatic changes if you choose to vibrate within your own truth frequency. And if you start to interact with others from that frequency of truth. When others push your boundary in some way and you respond to it with respect, with a stern but kind refusal, that's appropriate to the offense, right? That's crucial. It needs to be appropriate to the offense. It provides future fertile ground for clarification and understanding to take place between you and that other person that's pushing your boundaries. It's difficult work. I've said this numerous times. It's very difficult. And again, it's also about your choice of how you choose to polarize. And of course, there's also times when talking it out just doesn't work, or taking that approach does not work. And in that case, always remember that disassociation from something or someone does not require an explanation. You are never required to explain away why you're saying no to something or yes to something. This is another gray, wishy-washy area that has been created by the confusion around what real consent is and what sovereignty is, because we have been tricked into this fake sovereignty where they keep adults in a teenager loop, and they never let them really graduate into true adulthood, because the nanny state, the government, these entities, they know much better than us. Even as an adult, they create laws, right? So you never, in their eyes, you never will get out of that loop. But you don't have to live in that world. That it doesn't apply to those of us who choose to see outside of their fake structures, right? So if you can choose to see the bigger picture and you're looking to seek that higher positive path, then remember, you can and you must say no when you want to. You must stay true to yourself, what your heart and your being believes is right and true to you at that choice point moment. I talked about this in the very beginning episode of Consent, with this conscious moment that happens when a catalyst erupts. When a disruption happens or someone pushes those boundaries, it's your response that sets your internal polarization. You're choosing which way to gravitate by how you respond to that choice point. When you can gain a higher view and understand that disruptions and upsets are not always negative and do not need to be immediately viewed with aggravation, upset, a negative feeling. It's okay to view them slowly with patience and look to understand, even if they're painful or triggering or, offending or whatever, abusive, But there are levels to this, and it takes time, and it takes a lot of internal shadow work to love the hurtful parts of yourself first, so that you can identify more with that person who's harming you. It's a work in progress. And also, like I was saying, you're teaching others how to treat you with your responses. So coming back with a stern but equally weighted no or refusal or I do not consent, this is not okay, that is your responsibility to uphold as choosing positive polarity, because you're the bounce back. You are the opposing side to the negativity. And at that moment, when someone's pushing or infringing on you in a negative way, it's up to you to be brave and courageous and stand by your alignment and say, hey, this is not right. I'm a sovereign being. Point out the infringement, shine your light on it, and expose it. But again, if you choose not to, and you choose to victimization, why are you doing this to me? Oh, this is so hurtful. And you get stuck in that replay of the traumatic abuse or whatever the case may be, even if it's just something mean somebody said to you, or somebody who gave you a mean look in the store. You get stuck in the replay of that infringement or that abuse, and you don't allow yourself to just let it go and move on. And that's really the end all be all, is that your underlying energetic intention, and if you're going to let something go, and how you choose to react when your boundaries are crossed. And that's a whole other section of work to learn how to appropriately deal with negative infringements on your boundaries. I don't want to get too involved in that, because that is a very deep, whole other topic. And I really wanted to be able to cover just briefly the infringements and boundaries. I want to give a quick reminder before I close out here, just some practices that you can keep in mind if you are enjoying what I'm saying and you really want to start working on your boundaries, start understanding where you're infringing, where you're being infringed upon, and doing some active clearing to kind of free things up and get things more in the flow, in the moment, to feel better. I highly suggest meditating and thinking on what your morals are, what your physical boundaries are, and what your spiritual boundaries are. If you're a writer, write it down, anything that resonates with you, to try to hash those kind of out and make them a little firmer. Not set them in stone so that you can't move them, but just to gauge where you're at, and then you can pull back the lens and apply them into the spectrum of negative and positive polarity, and see without judgment as you can where your intentions lie. And then you can do some work to balance things out in a way that feels good to you, because that's what it's really about. The daily maintenance is about taking care of yourself to keep yourself in a healthy alignment to where you feel happy and you feel good. And as you start to make these small, steady changes that I'm going to mention, like integrating them into your life, you will see huge reflections, because the universe is just waiting for you to take these small little nudges, and then it amplifies and reflects back huge changes to you, because it's saying, yes, you're finally doing it. Okay, let's get this going. Like, we're trying to build up momentum. Think of it as kinetic or potential energy, right? We are energetic beings. So you're building up a momentum with these practices that you to stay in alignment with whichever side you choose. It can be either side. But for right now, I'm just going to give some positive polarity ideas for daily maintenance or practices, right? The single most best thing, I believe, is to do kind things that you don't expect or ever receive anything in return for. Get rid of that gratification need that you can chase, that comes along with service to others, because people get very twisted about service to others and it becomes external gratification. I'll do a whole other podcast on that because it's a giant topic. But yeah, if you just practice quickly little things, like simply leaving $1 inside a library book before you return it, or you pay for the next person's coffee behind you and you leave directly, you don't wait to see their smile or wait for their thank you or anything, or drop $1 somewhere. My son loved to do that. We hide $1 at the park for a little kid to find or something, Put a nice little thank you random note in the library book before you return it, or in your mailbox. These little bursts of kindness without the needing or expectation in your intention, in your energetic body, on any rely of the outcome. That's what stimulates positive changes in your world. That's what gets you flowing, and the universe flowing wonderful things back at you. You can also try to consciously recognize other people as sovereign beings and respect their perspective in the moment. When someone's speaking to you, work to hear literally what they're saying. Not what you're planning to say back afterwards, or not what you think that they're saying based on, your filter. You start making assumptions on their conclusions. Slow down. Listen to their words. Remember who they are. Remember they have their own perspective based on things that have happened to them specifically in the past. And try to hear them for what they're saying as the character that they play in our wonderful universe story, right? This switch of perspective alone, it frees up a lot of stagnant energy, and it promotes huge positive changes with relationships in your life. Also, spend some time, 5 minutes, 3 minutes in the morning to create that energetic boundary, visualization, and tap into your sovereign being and just feel it. And also, you can charge up your mind, body, and spirit each day in the morning, and then relax, review, and release your day each day at night. And it sets a good flow for yourself in your energetic body to try to release activities, consent, infringements, and distortions that you're working through every single day, right? Kind of clearing that cycle. The last thing that I will mention very quickly is the last simple step or tip, excuse me, is to start saying no. People struggle so much with this. They see love and service to others as doing things for people, and that's really not true. It appears like that from the service level. It really can, but it's not. The best analogy that I could ever give to service to others is that old saying about giving a man to fish versus teaching a man to fish. Service to others is teaching others to fish for themselves. Yes, we teach best through example, through active participation, and by showing others how it's done. But that is not the same as doing it for them. You can't do it for them. Tough love and allowing others to learn life on life's term is also a huge part of positive polarity and this service to others, a free directionality. It's really can be a hard thing to think about, but it's a very important to remember and hold that uninfringing free mentality as much as you can, but also take the little steps. So that's key. These small daily little steps, and just work in balancing every day as much as you can. When you suddenly remember during the day that you're totally off on autopilot, bring yourself back. Take a conscious breath. Do a couple of those things that I've mentioned. Or just think about your sovereignness and feel like the powerful creator being you are. So I hope these have cleared up a little bit about boundaries and infringements. If you didn't watch part 1 or listen to part 1, check it out. And thank you so much if you've listened through this whole thing. I hope I provided a bit of clarification. If you have any questions or comments, even if you don't like what I'm saying or you disagree, feel free to leave a comment. And I wish you a blessed day. Thank you so much.